Hello, everyone, and welcome to Magma Ragers episode 62. I'm joined here by Pandemonia, and we have a bunch of interesting stuff to discuss today. We have a couple new cards from Boomsday that have been released before we get into the upcoming massive release schedule that we'll talk about. There's some Boomsday parties that are going to be happening. Those are going to be pretty cool to talk about. There's also some single player campaign stuff that we didn't get to cover last week. And of course, we've got our usual Magma Ragers tips and esports segments. But before we get into all of this, how are you doing, Pandemonia?
I'm doing well. Doing well yourself, Deb?
I'm good. So I know something that makes you happy is talking about new cards, right? And we're going to be able to jump straight into that. So let's look first off. Blizzard released a Hearthside chat with the developers talking about the magnetic mechanic. There was a couple of interesting things that came out of this. For one, a clarification on just how it works. Basically, you put the mech... the mech with magnetic you need to place on the left-hand side of an existing mech on the board, and then they will fuse for loss.
Oh, magnetize.
Yeah,
magnetized.
I was trying to think of the saying that I literally just couldn't remember. For want of a better word, that's the saying. I couldn't remember want. In that saying. Anyway, for want of a better word, they'll fuse together and become one. The interesting thing about this is that in the video, it appeared to be green, the stats, which would indicate that is silenceable. If you compare it to something like the Zombeasts from Deathstalker Rexar, where in that case they're not, they like appear as white stats, which is kind of what says to me
Base
that
stats.
they are. Yeah, well, no. I mean, the actual color of the stats appear white, right? Of the attack and health.
Stats.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. It alters the base stats of the card in that case, which means that when you silence it, it doesn't lose its stats. It doesn't like only get the stats of one of the zombies, for instance. Yeah. So I mean, that's the big thing that kind of screams to me, oh, this is most likely going to be the situation here, that you can actually silence these, which is obviously not so great for the mechanic overall. And then the other interesting thing that I was really disappointed, and this is the biggest thing for me, was that it seems to only affect it when it comes into play, because I think there was one example where like a mech shifted over, where they put the magnetic mech. So they had a spider bomb on the field. They placed a spider bomb on the right, and to me, I would have thought that they would still magnetize because the one on the left has magnetic. But the magnetic check only seems to happen when you play the minion. So if you have like a magnetic minion on the far left, like a Direwolf Alpha or something in the middle, and then another mech on the right, and you like trade off the Direwolf Alpha in the middle, they're not going to magnetize after the two minions go next to each other. And that's pretty disappointing to me, because I thought that would have been a really interesting way to play with the board.
Some silly combinations of things you could do, right?
Yeah, and it introduces a lot of interesting positioning, not just for, or would have introduced a lot of interesting positioning, not just for you and like how you place and trade your own minions, but also how your opponent kills off your minions. Like imagine you have two good targets on either side of another minion, and your opponent uses or trades into the smaller minion, so the two fuse, and then they can use their single target removal on the bigger one now. Or they can silence to essentially remove that one mech. And I mean, maybe having it that way just made silence too powerful. As it is, I kind of fear for how powerful and prevalent silence will be in the meta if mech decks are actually a thing. Because silencing off the stats and the effect from the magnetic card are pretty big.
Yeah, especially since a lot of them have keywords like, Divine Shield, Taunt. I mean, we've seen a few
Death
now.
Rattle.
Exactly.
So I mean, I think that's a big problem for the magnetic mechanic, and I mean, overall, how do you feel about the mechanic compared to like last week before we had this Hearthside chat that the developers announced?
It was tough to say because, I mean, last week when we did the chat, when we did Magma Ragers, there wasn't that much information on it. So we literally just basically saw the cards at face value and the fact that they would be a buff. We didn't know exactly how it worked. Now that we do know how it works, a lot more of them seem to be a lot weaker.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
basically, there needs to be like I think they probably need to reveal or spoil a couple more like really powerful ones for the mechanic to see any play. And even then, it will be literally. I don't think you'll build a magnetic deck. I think it will be a good deck that has magnetic cards in it, right?
Yeah, I feel like
that makes sense.
yeah, but for mech as a tribe to work as a theme for a deck,
Yeah.
there needs to be some other payoffs for playing mechs, right? Other than just just magnetic. Yeah, I
Sure.
mean, I think that's the key point for me. And then one other thing they did say about magnetic is that it'll, in terms of class cards, it'll just be for warrior, paladin, and hunter, I believe.
Which by the way was all the Ground Street goons.
Yeah, yeah,
So
it's using
I
the same
like
grouping from that.
I'm not sure if it's intentional, and and based on that, I'm not sure if we're gonna see either a cycle of cards or something that's unique to like the other 3 hero groupings.
Yeah.
So like the J classes, I'm not sure if we're gonna see something that is specific to those 3, like that.
Yeah, and the big problem I have with it is that mechs are inherently a kind of tempo-based strategy, at least in how we've seen mechs before up until now, right? And magnetic in and of itself leads to either kind of a tempo or aggressive strategy because it's all about having minions on the board and buffing them. And that's something that doesn't fly well with Warrior in particular. I mean, if we remember Grime Street Goons, Warrior was by far the worst at doing any of the Grime Street Goons things, right? I mean, in that meta, it was actually pretty good because Pirate Warrior was a thing, but that had nothing to do with Grime Street Goons. That was just, patches, and they had Nzot's first mate.
And in the beginning, people tried Grime Street, the Gadgeteer, the one that buffed hand, but eventually the Dex was like, no, it doesn't actually want it anymore.
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of find it weird to group Warrior with those two classes that have very, very different hero powers. And, I mean, just very different class identities to me. Like, it seems like maybe they're trying to turn Warrior into more of a tempo class. But we'll talk a little bit more about Warrior when we get to one of their mechs a little bit later. But overall, I definitely am not as positive about the mechanic as I might have been before. I think so far from what I've seen, it looks like it's going to fall flat a bit, but it's very difficult to say when at the moment we have so few mechs in the game that they basically have to add a lot in this expansion, which we obviously expect them to, in order to actually just make mechs as a tribe in any way kind of successful.
What was the hero? It was Heroic. Cough, cough, Heroic. That also fell flat, wasn't it? No, what is the hero power where you used your hero power?
Inspire.
Expire, that's the one.
Yeah.
Basically, because that also kind of fell flat.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit different because Inspire was like the whole essence of the set. And Magnetic seems to only be limited to a couple classes. But anyway, let's actually get into talking about some of the cards. And we're going to be starting off with a card that I think is going to be pretty key in mech decks if they are going to be viable. And that is Upgradable Framebot. Do you want to tell us exactly what Upgradable Framebot is?
It's a neutral 2-mana mech, and it's a 2-mana 1/5, and it's just a 2. It's basically it's a vanilla 2-mana 1/5.
Yeah. With the mech tag. Well, with the mech tag. Tribe.
So what makes it basically, and even when they revealed it, it's meant to be, the frame for being upgraded to. You're meant to be able to magnetize a whole bunch of stuff onto it to basically make a big beefy mech, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's in the name, right? Upgradable Framebot.
Right.
And I mean, I think they've basically made this as neutral. If it's to facilitate magnetic, you imagine it's mostly going to be for those 3 classes that we mentioned, the 3 magnetic classes. And currently, a lot of them are kind of lacking solid 2-drops. I mean, there's not really any in Paladin, Shaman, in Paladin, Warrior, or Hunter. So it definitely makes sense that they needed to put that in the 2-drop slot. And it makes sense because 2 mana is a very key point to which you need to start snowballing the game, right? If you are going to be a board-centric tempo deck, you either need to have very powerful board flip mechanics in order to get back on the board if you don't have it early on, or you need to start getting a tempo advantage from turns 1 and 2. And Upgradable Framebot is actually really well positioned to do that if you can pair it with some synergy cards like magnetic cards.
And even outside of the mech tag and the magnetic synergy, I think it actually still has potential in just sort of board centric decks as a whole. Like even Zoo might want this card just because, much like some of those decks play Diamol
Yeah.
in a similar role. I mean, Diamol in a lot of the decks doesn't matter. It only really matters in Hunter that's a beast, right?
Sure.
And
I think I think it's a mistake to compare this to Diamol, because I actually think Diamol is so much more powerful as a 1-mana 1/3 than upgradable Framebot as a 2-mana 1/5.
Sure.
Like comparatively, I think Framebot would need to be a 2-mana 2/5. I think would be comparable to Diamol, because the idea with Diamol is that it can trade into other 1-drops and survive. And that's what we see with trading into all the 2/1s that are around. That's what makes Diamol so powerful, actually, I think.
But also, upgradable Framebot also potentially has synergies with good old combo priest.
Yeah.
But, there's, I mean, I'm not sure if it will be a thing, but there is the fact that it's got the higher health pool of 5 means that it is a card that priest might combo priest might want.
Yeah, and turn 2 is definitely a turn where most of the time they're just hero powering. Unless you have the nuts with a Radiant Elemental and a powered shield or something that you can go silly with. Often, Framebot on 2 might actually be a pretty solid play for those decks, where they can find ways to buff the health of minions. You can think about it in your Lady in White decks as well. You get a 2-mana 5/5 late in the game.
Sure. And then also potentially, even I was thinking in Shaman, because of Flame Tongue Totem, or basically in any deck with Direwolf Alpha, really potentially makes this obviously better.
Yeah, or any kind of token decks as well. I mean, the 2-mana 1/5 that exists in the game is Druid of the Swarm, where you can choose to put it as a 2-mana 1/5, but that of course has Taunt as well, which is a very useful addition to that. I mean, that's kind of been played traditionally in kind of token token Druid decks. So maybe if there was some kind of token deck that could make use of upgradable Framebot, that could be a place for it as well.
Mech tokens incoming.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what other mech synergies there are, right? I really hope Magnetic is not the only option for mechs. Otherwise, I can see a lot of the mech stuff kind of falling short, or at least being good, not because it's a mech, just because the card is good.
Yeah.
Okay, and then moving on to our next mech, we have a magnetic one here. We have Wargear. Wargear is one of the most simple magnetic cards, I would say. It's a 5-mana 5/5 common mech with magnetic. So that's it. It's just 5-mana 5/5 stats. But, it can also be a 5-mana 5/5 minion. I think the one card people kind of jump to compare this to is Blessing of Kings. Yep. The difference obviously being that it can only go on a magnetic minion, but I think that downside per se is kind of,
balanced out by the fact you can play it as a minion.
Yeah, exactly. It's balanced out by that. And I mean, I think overall Wargear seems pretty solid as a 5-mana 5/5. That's okay. I mean, you wouldn't ever play this in a non-mech deck, because, you've got cards like Cobalt Scalebane, Fungal Mancer that you could play in that slot instead. Yeah, Bittertide Hydra. And so, obviously, Wargear is going to be something that is going to be powerful for a mech deck. But I think what's really powerful is paying 5 mana for essentially 5 damage is pretty good for any kind of aggressive deck as well. If these are kind of zoo or aggressive decks, then if you can attach Wargear to one of your existing mechs and go face with it for 5, that's actually pretty powerful. And it gets 5 health as well, so that's going to make it slightly more difficult to remove. So I think, Wargear actually looks like it could be a promising card for mech decks if they are actually a thing.
Yeah, I mean, the stats are I was also just thinking it might not be bad in Arena, but then I realized, wait, the chance of you getting the mech synergy in Arena is actually less, so it might not be as good then.
I mean, Arena is a case of where they bucket things as well.
Yeah.
Because when things are bucketed, in the wrong bucket, but they're actually, let's say they bucketed too low and they're much more powerful than everything else in their bucket, they'll be picked a lot. Or if they bucketed with too many other good cards that are not going to be picked. So it's so hard to say, with Arena. Plus, we're far from Arena experts, definitely more constructed focus. But overall, I mean, in those kind of formats, you do kind of think that you can get away with just a 5-mana 5/5 a lot of the time, and then it does have the upside of Magnetic when you can make use of that.
Sure.
Next up, we have Beryllium Nullifier. As the the local warrior lover here, do you want to tell us about this card?
So when I saw this card, it's a 7-mana 3/8 warrior minion, and it's a mech, and it has magnetic and can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. So what Magic players know as essentially Shroud.
Yeah, it's the effect we see on like Bear Shark and Fairy Dragon. Yeah,
Fairy Dragon was like the first one, but 7 mana for a 3/8 is terrible. Like,
I mean the first
that's wise. It's absolutely terrible. So like if you from a vanilla test point of view, for a 3/8 you would pay what, 4 mana?
No, five mana seems reasonable. Like you get 5 mana 3/6s and 4 mana 3/6s that have downsides.
So you pay, let's say, 5 mana. So you're paying essentially 1.5, 2 extra mana for the ability not to be targeted, and it's got a very low attack.
Yeah.
Not to mention, the problem I think honestly with this card is that it doesn't even have taunt.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think taunt make this card decent because as a massive war, but the problem is you're playing 7 mana to play a 3/8. Your opponent can either just ignore it or can just kill it with their 6 or 7 drop, right?
Yeah, or they just go face. I mean, the idea of this is obviously that you're meant to be attaching it to, some super mega mech you've built up on the board, and now they can't use their single target removal. But if you have some super mega mech on the board, because it's going to have to be a pretty powerful mech that you're attaching this to for it to be really that good anyway. And if you have that on the board, if you have it on the board, that means they didn't have the removal anyway. So what like you're playing around them top decking the removal, because at this late stage in the game, there's no removal that's not going to like deal with it, right? Meteor is like one of the more expensive. Meteor, Siphon Soul, those are the 2 more expensive single target like hard removals, and they're gonna kill the minion before you get to Beryllium Nullifier it anyway.
Yeah, this card. I mean, the whole idea of wanting to protect your mega mech would have been good if this was a lot cheaper. Like if this was like a 2 mana 1/3 or something like a lot lower costed, then I would say it might be a decent idea. The fact that it costs 7 mana,
I would also like its stats to be more flipped the other way. I think that's true to me for a lot of the magnetic stuff. Because I feel like a lot of the magnetic decks are going to be more, aggressive decks. Like if you think about the decks where you want to buff your thing that's on the board and make use of it, those are very often more aggressive decks. Sometimes they can be more tempo or zoo oriented, but I think the big issue of building like a tempo mech deck is that you put all your eggs in one basket. Or one mech, literally, and then you just get blown out by like tempo flipping cards like Vilespine Slayer or Sap or Polymorph or Hex or anything like any silence. So I really don't see it being like a tempo deck because it's going to be so vulnerable to those other tempo decks and the ways that they usually flip the board. And Beryllium Nullifier is not going to stop that because it just comes way too late, and there's no way I want to put this card in my deck.
Yeah.
Like I can't think of a deck where I really want to play this. Like it would have to be some nonsense deck, like a Shadowwalk type deck where you put like weird cards in that like we wouldn't see play in other decks.
For me, like I think what would make this card, I think like borderline playable would be if it had taunt.
Yeah.
Like that would be literally
honestly. The first thing I thought to compare it to is Bone Mare, which is a little bit unfair to compare it to a card that got nerfed. But if you compare it to Bone Mare, like Bone Mare gave you 4/4 stats for 7 on the top stats that were affecting the board now in the way that Magnetic does as well, buffing something that's currently on the board. And it gave you a 5/5 on top of that. I mean, this is putting all of your eggs in one basket. It's just giving you 3/8 stats. It's so far off Bone Mare. I would rather just play an 8 mana Bone Mare in my Magnetic deck most of the time.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, you're paying 7 mana for 11 stats versus 8 mana for, 18 stats?
Yeah, I think I'm sorry. I think that's enough of Beryllium Nullify. I'm very not sold on that.
Okay. Moving on.
Moving on. Next we have Annoyer Module. Annoyer Module is a 4 mana 2/5 Paladin. 2/4 Paladin mech with Magnetic, Divine Shield, and Taunt. So
howdy.
Yeah, it's basically Annoyertron returned, but 2 of them for 1. It's essentially just double Annoyertron in every single way. Double attack, double health, and double the mana. Shield. Yes, because double Divine Shield doesn't work as a mechanic. And no double Taunt, because that's also not a thing.
Yeah,
and then it has Magnetic attached to it, right? So that's the big difference here.
So, as a control, if Control Paladin becomes a thing again, I could see it. I mean, this is not bad. I mean, it's just a brick. It's just a solid war, right? I mean,
yeah.
It's exactly annoying. Like,
yeah.
I mean, that's.
I mean, I think there's a big difference between this and like Annoyertron and how they operated in those kind of decks. Is that it's okay to play this annoying card that kind of takes up their time when it's cheap and you can fit it in alongside other things, or it happens in your earlier turns and you can snowball that advantage. Whereas Annoyer Module might come down a little bit late. 4 mana 2/4s have traditionally not been very good. It's been very difficult to make a 4 mana 2/4 work. Yeah, I mean, okay, there's ones played in like fringe combo decks like that and like Sandbinder and Shadowwalk Shaman, but realistically, a 4 mana 2/4 is not good enough. The big thing here is like Divine Shield and Taunt, and what do they do for the deck? Maybe in some kind of like even Paladin, or in some kind of Paladin where you're also playing Corpse Taker. Corpse Taker at least gets the benefits of Divine Shield and Taunt. But, then you're playing a 4 mana 3/3 with Divine Shield and Taunt, and that seems much nicer. So why you're playing a 4 mana 2/4 with that when, you're also playing a 4 mana 3/3 in the deck? I'm not sure those two really fit in the deck for that reason. But overall, I mean, maybe if Paladin... this is much better than the Warrior card. That's all I have to say. Yeah. Really.
And you're mostly paying for versatility. That's why. So the question will be, is if the versatility is worth that extra cost, and I mean that we'll have to see, as the cards get released and the meta develops.
Yeah, I definitely think the Paladin mech deck seems more reasonable than the Warrior one, especially based on these 2 cards that we've seen.
Yeah.
Overall, though, I think of the 3 we've seen, in the Hunter one being Spider Bomb and the 2 we just spoke about here, I think Spider Bomb definitely looks like the more promising one. So right now, Hunter is a little bit more positively charged for its Magnetic deck.
Oh my goodness.
Haha, science jokes. Next up, we have Menacing Nimbus. Actually, wait. Sorry, the ordering is slightly off here. But let's talk about Menacing Nimbus. Do you want to tell us about Menacing Nimbus here?
So, Menacing Nimbus is a 2 mana 2/2 Shaman minion. It's an elemental with Battlecry. Add a random elemental to your hand. So, as a lot of people have remarked, this is basically kind of a cut and paste of like a lot of cards, iterations of cards that we've seen already. I mean, ranging from spells like, ranging from cards like Babbling Book. We've seen this thing of add a random. So, I mean, basically, this is like a Jeweled Macaw of elementals, right?
Yeah, it's the elemental Babbling Book. I mean, that's
exactly,
the biggest thing to compare it
to. Jeweled Macaw.
Yeah.
So, obviously, severely, I mean, not good stats. I mean, 2 mana 2/2 is not good.
Yep.
And
we took a look at the kind of possibilities you could get from Menacing Nimbus yesterday when we were doing a bit of preparation for the episode. I mean, if people want to see the little charts we put together, they can check out your Twitter at PandemoniaZA. Quick plug in for that one. And I mean, basically, what were the kind of numbers for, let's say, bad, okay, and good elementals that you could get?
So in terms of so obviously, we kind of it's one of those things where you have to generalize, right? So sure, there's going to be the one scenario in which one of the bad ones will win you the game. But we kind of, we kind of judged them on sort of average. And I think it was, if I just check, what we called good was about 22%. Okay was 38%. And bad was 40%. So basically, sort of, let's say you have a 60% chance to get something either okay or good.
Yeah.
Which I was a bit surprised. I thought there were a lot more bad elementals, but the problem is if you just go look at some of the bad elementals, some of them are really bad, like Air Elemental, Arcane, Ice Walker, Magma Rager, Ozrook. There are some pretty terrible bad. The bad ones are very bad.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, it is definitely a bit of an issue there in terms of those the elementals, and ultimately the question is getting a random elemental good? It's better than it seems. Obviously these numbers are going to change a little bit as we see the rest of the elementals that look like they're going to be in this set, but right now from what we know, I'm not going to play this because the chance of getting the really, really good elementals is also a little bit too low. I mean, we look here at a total of 45 elementals. So, to get your Alakia, 1 in 45, to get your Kalimos, a 1 in 45. So the really good elementals, the super, super good tier, not just the ones we put in the good bracket, the very good ones, I think are a little bit too low. And the other big thing is that right now this is really just competing with a card like Earthen Might. Earthen Might is 2 mana for 2/2 stats, essentially, and it gives you the elemental as long as you put it on an existing elemental. So in an elemental themed deck, Earthen Might makes a little bit more sense because it has better tempo, because you can play Firefly on 1 and Earthen Might on 2, right?
Sure, yeah. That's kind of, I think, the curve. And, like we're saying, there's no real reason at the moment to curve into a 3 mana elemental matter synergy. There are 3 mana elementals, but none of them care that you played an elemental the previous turn, right?
Exactly. And I mean, the other big thing is that people have looked at it in terms of Even Shaman. Oh, okay, you get some extra value in Even Shaman, but Even Shaman's not really a deck that wants value. It's a deck that wants tempo and favors tempo. And when you have a 2 mana 2/3 that deals 2 damage to a minion compared to Menacing Nimbus, you're almost never going to want Menacing Nimbus in your opening hand, right? It's literally a card I would mulligan away in Even Shaman. And that tells me that it's not a good 2-drop for the deck at all, right?
Yeah, you don't want to in a deck that prides itself on board control. You don't want to be playing a 2 mana 2/2.
Yeah, especially in a deck that doesn't really have the best of recovery mechanisms after it falls behind.
Yeah.
So Menacing Nimbus doesn't really seem to suit itself well to that deck. Anyway, back to our mech theme, as we had a slight interruption there for that elemental. Do you want to tell us about Ziliax?
So Ziliax is the neutral legendary. Well, it's one of the neutral legendaries, and it's a 5 mana 3/2 with, and now it's one of those that literally has, I think, nearly every keyword on it. It has.
It has 4 and magnetic.
It has Divine Shield, Taunt, Lifesteal, Rush, as well as be magnetic. So the cards are kind of immediately sort of reminds you a bit of, obviously a much cheaper Alakia, but most more similar, I think, is Wicker Flame. What's his name? Oh,
Burn Bristle, Wicker Flame, Burn Bristle.
Yeah, that one. The Paladin Legend, the 3 mana 2/2.
Yeah.
Taunt and Lifesteal.
And Divine Shield.
Divine Shield, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that, except it's 1 mana more expensive, and it comes with, Rush and Magnetic. Oh, sorry,
It's
yeah, 2 mana more expensive.
Wicker Flame was 3 mana.
Yeah, okay. And Wicker Flame was a 2/2, is this a 3/2?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's similar in just the keywords. And I think the one thing, once again, the Corpse Taker synergy we spoke about a little bit earlier is there with Ziliax. That's a thing, but I'm not sure you want Corpse Taker in your mech decks anyway.
Countess Ashmore, boys.
Yeah, Countess Ashmore is a card that can draw this. But how good Ziliax is when you're getting it turn 8 at the earliest is questionable. The one big disappointment for me, and the one big thing that makes me not as keen on Ziliax here is that whole like magnetic only affecting when you play them on the board. When I first saw Ziliax, and I thought that,
sad about that.
Yeah, when I first saw Ziliax, I thought, okay, you can play Ziliax, rush it into a minion, kill it off, then like trade off the minion that's between Ziliax and your other mech,
With
and then you can.
Shield.
Yeah. I mean, the Divine Shield means Ziliax is not going to die. That's what I mean. You kill off the minion that Ziliax is charging in or rushing into, hopefully. That's what I mean. Then you kill off the minion between Ziliax and your other mech, and then your other mech gets like Divine Shield, Rush, Lifesteal. I was actually a bit interested as to whether it would get Divine Shield if Ziliax had lost Divine Shield in that case, but we can see that that's simply not how the magnetic mechanic works. You have to play Ziliax next to the mech, on the left of it directly, and then it'll just give that mech its stats and all its abilities. I mean, I also think Rush is kind of pointless on this card. Rush's only has any kind of impact when you're playing Ziliax by itself and not with its magnetic, right?
Yep. And a 5-mana 3/2 Rush, not quite what you quite the stat line that you want.
Yeah, I mean, we have a 4-mana 3/2 with charge and lifesteal. The Chillblade Crusader, I think it is.
The Chillblade Crusader, yeah.
Yeah, in Paladin, I mean, we've said already that the magnetic decks are most likely going to be Hunter, Paladin, and Warrior decks, based on the decks that actually, or based on the classes that are actually getting class magnetic mechanics. Or cards with the magnetic mechanic that are class cards. Whew. Saying magnetic mechanic is really a tongue twister after a while.
So that 10 times quickly.
Yeah, I'm just going to start saying magnetic without the mechanic part because...
just say magnetic. Yeah.
Anyway, so in those situations, I mean, I think Ziliax is a little bit underwhelming. I think it is definitely useful that it has Rush in terms of being able to play it on the board. But honestly, what that reminded me of was Flanking Strike. Flanking Strike is essentially 4 mana, deals 3 damage, so it's like having and leaves you with a 3/3. So it's as if that 3/3 had Rush and Divine Shield, except that Flanking Strike isn't limited by Taunt.
No. It's that the 3/3 wouldn't have Rush.
No, what I'm
you already done the 3 damage, so
yes,
it's basically just.
That's what I'm saying. It's as if that 3/3 had Rush and Divine Shield, right?
Yeah.
So, you're getting an extra health. You're just not getting Taunt and Lifesteal. I'm not sure how relevant that's going to be in magnetic decks in particular. But, I mean, Ziliax is definitely something you will put in your magnetic decks based on what we can see at the moment.
It's the flashiest magnetic mech right now.
Yeah.
And obviously this is meant to... I think, judging from just the fact that it's a legendary, I think this is kind of their flagship mech, if it will.
Yeah.
A flagship magnetic mech.
Maybe. This is not a reason that I can see to play magnetic or to play a mech deck, but it is a card that if you're building a magnetic mech deck, it's going to be something you definitely want to test in that deck at least, and we'll have to see exactly how it plays out. It's also, very meta dependent. Okay, the one thing that all these mechs kind of raise the question of is, do you think they're going to print a mech crab? I mean, we've got crabs for most of the other tribes, but no mech crab yet. And if they're going to be printing a lot of mechs...
Maybe the next set, because I think most of the time, they've never usually they always print the set after, isn't it?
Well, not necessarily. I think in this case, they know that they're pushing the mech mechanic or the mech tribe enough, so maybe they'll push it. Hopefully it's more of a Dragon Slayer than a Galacca Crawler, right? Or Hungry Crab. I mean, Hungry Crab is kind of the worst example. Because Dragon Slayer is more playable by itself when you're not just playing it for the tech.
Hungry Crab was playable by itself in certain decks.
Yes, but not really.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Crawler wasn't that bad as well. As a 2-mana 2/3 is not terrible.
But let's be honest, we only played Galacca Crawler because Patches was everywhere. Like when patches went away, so did Galaga Crawler, and that tells you a lot. I mean, we play Amani Berserkers. We're not playing Galaga Crawlers right now. So, and we play Plated Beetles. We're not playing Galaga Crawler right now. Galaga Crawler is not good enough. Like,
unless they introduce like a pirate mech.
I mean, the only thing Galaga Crawler is eating is like Nightmare Amalgam in the meta right now, and that's not relevant because that's not seen much play. But it is a mech. We do have to remember that it is also a mech.
The mech and everything.
Yep. Okay. And next we have Stargazer Luna. So this was revealed through like a raunchy animation, which was pretty cool. Stargazer Luna is a 3-mana 2/4 legendary. It's a mage card, and it reads: after you play the rightmost card in your hand, draw a card. So my first reaction to this was, rightmost is like the least controllable one. That kind of sucks, because it's basically what you've drawn. But it does lead to some interesting kind of situations where you go like Stargazer Luna, Sorcerer's Apprentice, and then you can play lots of cheap spells off the top of your deck, a la Miracle Rogue.
I mean, if you watch the video, that's basically obviously what they kind of...
Is it?
That was kind of what they were promoting. Is that so? They had a Sorcerer's Apprentice on board, and then you played like a free arcane missiles into a mirror image, into a bunch of other cheap stuff, to show, oh, look at this, living the dream.
Yeah. So it's like a bad Flame Waker.
Yeah, in a
because
way. I mean,
you draw the cards, and honestly, you would rather your cheap spells did damage to minions and face.
I mean, potentially, there's some combo potential with that and Sorcerer's Apprentices.
Maybe.
I mean, it's like in a way, it's easy. I think you can think of it like a more situational auctioneer.
Sure. It's just very, very easy to break the combo, right? Because unlike Auctioneer, where you can kind of keep playing spells off the top of your deck, and then you hit a minion, you just play another spell in your hand. If you hit a minion, you have to play it with Stargazer Luna. You can't play something else to get one more try at drawing one of the spells. So,
well, for that turn, if it survives, you can obviously do it again.
Yes, sure. So I think that's the one thing, it's in Mage, it's not possible to kind of reduce the minion cost. So there's no way, like with Sorcerer's Apprentices, where you can actually chain things for a long time. And I mean, yeah.
I think it might be good in the fact that as a 3-mana 2/4, I think it can contest the board decently. But also, it's one of those cards that I think just the threat of what it can do it will be strong enough that people then have to remove it immediately, right? Like Bran.
Perhaps.
Like, even though like the body is not that intimidating, and even if the outcome might not be that great, the fact that there is a possibility that the outcome could be crazy, like with Bran shenanigans, might just force them to remove it, right?
I think it's less the super extreme outcomes that are the issue. It's like if you're playing this in an aggro mage, for example, and you play this and you just play Fireball like the next turn, the fact that Fireball is also cycling them into possibly more burn, even if it's not reduced and it's just 6 damage to the face, is something that you're worried about if you're trying to defend against a deck like Aggro Mage, which already has a lot of ways to cycle through all of its cards to get more burn. So I think that's the more likely kind of scenario. The big issue with that is the way you want to curve in the Aggro Mage is to kind of go Arcanologist into Kirantor Mage, and that kind of leaves Stargazer Luna as maybe more of a late game thing, and then you kind of just want to have drawn and played Aluneth anyway. So is Stargazer Luna really what you want? I don't know.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you still at Aluneth. I mean, obviously, eventually the idea is like late game, you literally go like Luna into Sorcerer's Apprentice, and then like play out the rest of your deck, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the idea.
I definitely think the card's pretty interesting. I like it in terms of design, and I'm a fan of the card. I'm just not really sure what the deck is gonna involve yet. And comparing it to ways to draw your deck like Aluneth, a lot of the time I'd rather just have Aluneth. And competing for those slots is going to be tricky for the card, I think. Okay, so those are kind of all the cards we have for today, but there's going to be a lot of cards coming up soon. We've got news now on the release schedule. It's going to be a pretty hectic release schedule as we've seen before, starting on the 23rd of July after the reveal stream, which is on the 22nd, I think.
Well, no, it's on the 23rd.
Or was it on 21st? Oh, 23rd.
It's 7 p.m. our South African time.
Okay.
They are actually releasing a bunch of cards before then, but like the official like where cards get released every hour is starting on 23rd of July.
Yeah. Or at
And
least like every couple hours.
yeah,
I mean,
so,
it's going to be pretty much as hectic as it was last time. But yeah, that's only going to start on the 23rd. There will be like I think 4 cards that are scheduled to be released
yeah,
in the week of the 15th of July, which is this week basically.
yeah. But what they've done, like what they did with I think was the last set. I think they'll start with the Witchwood was where they put like the pictures of they put snippets of the cards that they released. So obviously it creates a lot of talk and hype because then a lot of people like you and I were early, you're looking at it going, ooh, who's this? What class is this? What card is this? And sometimes there are like a lot of visual clues to suggest that we both agreed. I think I can't remember. One of the cards is probably is almost definitely a druid card, right?
Yeah, because the picture looks like it's Malfurion wearing some
Malfurion.
science goggles.
Legos, or the one looks like a mage elemental. So it's cool. There's a fair bit of speculation, to see what each of these cards does, and obviously I think it's good in terms of getting people hyped, right?
Yeah, I really like this. It does get people talking a little bit more. We can definitely see that there's more elementals to come, though. I think that's a key point you can see from a lot of these cards. And obviously we know there's a lot more mechs, but I mean, just seeing that there's more elementals to come is an interesting thing.
I mean, the one picture's almost literally just looks like a Noyatron.
Yeah, that one was the weirdest one. I was like, that looks.
It looks like an older Noyatron though, so I wonder if it'll be like a Noyatron version 2.
Yeah, but then we already just had the Anoya module, which so was kind of Anoyatron themed anyway. So I don't know. We'll see.
Sure.
Okay, and then there's going to be some other interesting stuff happening with... the one other thing to note about the release schedule, is that it kind of ends on the 31st of July, which kind of corresponds with the possible 7th of August, kind of release date, which I think they did confirm. It was a little bit up in the air as to whether it was confirmed or not with the last Magma Ragers, but
it was confirmed, yeah.
But it does fit the schedule, right? It's like after that they'll do the full release dump, and then we'll have all the cards for like 1 or 2 days before. Well, we'll know all the cards 1 or 2 days before the full release. But this time they are doing one more kind of step in the hyping up the expansion, and that's going to be these Boomsday parties. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what those are?
So for those of you who've played games like Magic the Gathering, the release parties basically kind of they now the events that are at certain places where you will be able to actually open and play with your new cards before they're officially released. So hence the term pre-release. So the way the Hearthstone one was working, and there's a whole bunch of venues across North America, South America, Europe, APAC. Unfortunately, it seems that this feature currently it feels like it's in a sort of a beta stage. So there was, like, from what I saw or didn't see, there was no actual application. There was no
place to apply to kind of become become a venue.
It felt like they approached certain places and said, "Hey, we're trying something out. Are you interested?"
Yeah, I think they're doing it with taverns that they know and they can kind of track to see how it does and those kind of things, which is a little bit disappointing because it's less hype to get it the second time, to kind of miss out the first time that this kind of thing happens. Definitely feels like a little bit less hype, and I think that's something that they kind of forget a little bit. As to how it kind of makes all the other people feel. Like, even let's say next expansion, maybe we do get these in South Africa in particular, then like I'm still gonna I'm probably gonna go, but like I'm gonna feel like it's not the first time. We're getting like seconds of this the second experience of this, and that's not a good feeling.
Sure, but the problem is it's also one of these cases of where I think you got to kind of empathize a bit that they might be doing this just to try test it to see in terms of how it works, in terms of like stability. Because the last thing you want to do is just go, okay, guys, we're doing this, and you have your first pre-release event. You have plenty of venues around the world, and then the servers die, or there's a massive error, or there's a massive problem.
That's true.
So it's kind of, I mean, maybe I think some people talk this was maybe why Hearthstone needs like a PTR, maybe or some sort of beta server in a way.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, the big issue with those kind of things is spoiling cards before they come out or anything like that. But anyway, let's not get into that big discussion. The other thing to note about this though is it is just going to be like the pre-release packs that you buy. So you're still not going to be able to buy extra packs from the shop
or craft.
or craft.
You won't be able to disenchant or craft. So the cards will be in your collection. You just won't be able to do with them anything after the event. Well, there's gonna be there's two Tavern Brawl events.
Yes. Yeah, the way it works is you can only use them in either a Tavern Brawl deck that you can construct out of the cards you open, or in a Tavern Brawl where you get kind of given one of the deck recipes. So I don't believe for that one you'll actually have to have all the cards yourself. I think you'll just be able to play with that. But I think the other one is pretty interesting because the other one is kind of almost close to a sealed game mode because, as you say, there's no crafting. You kind of have to build out of what you open. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, it's kind of, I think it's quite optimistic news for people who like Hearthstone. I mean, okay, I was Hearthstone, but Arena specifically, but like who like Arena. The kind of everyone's on an equal footing kind of vibe. Although
I don't really see it as an arena thing. I see it as optimistic news for people that like come from other card games, like you mentioned, like Magic the Gathering, and love these types of events. I don't really see it as benefiting like hardcore arena players in any way.
But also, there's the fact that you get to then obviously you get to see. I think it's got that whole community aspect. You get to share and say, "Oh, look at what I pulled." Look at what I pulled.
Yeah.
Look at this crazy pack, or look at what crap I got.
And I think it's great news as well for those hosting firesides, and encouraging people to get more active as tavern hosts, because this is a reason to actually drive people to places, right? Because you get to play with the cards early. I mean, that's one of the major reasons I went to a lot of pre-releases, and even up until like probably this year, I was at least going to pre-releases just to kind of get that early hands-on experience with cards, and also to play them in like that sealed format where you are limited to kind of what you open.
Yeah, and how even with all the RNG, how lucky you are with opening packs.
Yeah,
like we and not just whether you get legendary, but now or do you get legendaries that are actually good.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's also, it can't be like, oh, you've saved lots of gold and saved lots of dust. And I think that's the one slightly unfortunate thing is for the people that do go full free to play, it's going to be difficult that, that you have to buy the pre-release in order to kind of participate in that kind of constructed part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and obviously those people that purchase both pre-releases will be advantaged. So it would be nice if they had a way to like limit, you can only open one of your pre-releases or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, or only 50 packs maybe or something.
Yeah, but anyway. It is definitely a positive move, I think, for Hearthstone, and it's some good news to see extra kind of features like this coming. Certainly not something we were expecting, but something we have seen in other games for a long time. Yep. And then obviously we have the Midsummer Fire Festival that's currently happening. So make sure you log in, finish your quests to earn double gold as well. That's obviously just a good way and good timing to build up into the expansion that's going to be coming up. There is one other thing to talk about for the expansion that we didn't talk about before, and that's the single player PvE campaign. So instead of having a kind of Witchwood style monster hunt or Kobold's Dungeons and Kobold Dungeons type things.
You nearly said Kobold's Dungeons and Dragons.
I know, yeah. And instead of having that, we're just going to have basically what look like puzzles. So, lethal puzzles.
They've called it the Puzzle Lab.
Yeah, the Puzzle Lab. So you're going to have kind of puzzles to find lethal, by the looks of it, lethal puzzle, and mirror puzzle, which I'm guessing is to get the boards into like a mirrored state on either side, something like that. Yeah. Board clear, which is obviously clearing either possibly both sides of the board or just your opponent's side of the board. Survival, which is obviously just surviving some complex board state or set of moves from your opponent, something like that. and those seem to be the 4 modes we're going to have. A couple puzzles for each of those kind of genres, or themes of puzzles, let's say. And obviously the reward, as usual, is going to be the card back.
No, but only first they're going to do what they did in the Witchwood, where so if you beat all of these 4 sections, you then play against Dr. Boom.
Oh, okay.
They're going to do what they did, and then only once you beat Dr. Boom, then you get the card back. That's
okay. But you don't have to beat Dr. Boom with every class, do you? Or is it going to be like that?
I'm assuming it's going to be like a special deck. I would imagine it's probably going to be like a mixture of decks, or a mixture of classes. It won't. I don't think it will be a pre-con deck. I don't think it'll be a deck that you have to build.
No.
It might be a deck that they give you.
So it will be a pre-con deck, a pre-constructed deck, one that they give you. Yeah. I think that is definitely more likely. The one thing I think that's interesting is it's definitely possible, I think, depending on how they've implemented this, of course, that they could add more puzzles over time. It makes more sense than adding more bosses to Witchwood or anything like that. But they certainly haven't said anything about that, and it's not something I'm expecting at all. But it would be a cool way to kind of stagger content across the lifetime of the expansion.
I don't think they will, also because they specifically say once you complete all of the experience, you go against Dr. Boom. So, so I don't think they would make you do that and then add more afterwards.
I definitely agree they're not going to do that, but I think they could, and it's a little bit of a missed opportunity in that sense. To kind of push the expansion, the kind of lifetime of the expansion over a while. Is the Puzzle Lab actually going to be available on release, or is it going to be kind of a little bit staggered?
They said it's only going to be
the 21st of August, yeah.
So 2 weeks afterwards. So much like what they did, very similar to what they did with the Witchwood. And it's completely free to play.
Yeah.
And like we said, the only reward, it seems, is the card back. It doesn't look like there is actually any packs you get. So basically, you're mainly just playing it for fun and to get the special card back, right?
Yeah, I must say I'm actually really looking forward more to these puzzles than I was to any of the dungeon run stuff as well. I think the puzzle stuff's really cool. Maybe there will still be some kind of quests that come along with it when it comes out to give you some packs at least.
Yeah, the nice thing though is this also, I think, it's not just completely RNG. This is a lot more test people's creativity, I think. I mean, especially if I think of the board clear and the mirror, it's probably going to require some rather creative play. So I think it's good that it kind of, in a way, challenges different aspects of playing Hearthstone and different aspects of the rules.
Yeah, it is almost like an advanced tutorial in that sense, right? Like teaching people how to use mechanics in creative and interesting ways. At least that's the way I picture it after. Basically, I'm thinking of Trinity series things they did in between with Can You Spot the Lethal? Basically, I'm hoping they hired those people. Yeah.
Well, basically, I'm going to put my money on there's going to be at least one Defile one, right?
Yeah, for board clear or something, yeah. That's it. Or, it'll be, even if it's Defile's a kind of a mislead, right? If they have Defile in your hand, but you're not supposed to use it to complete the puzzle.
Like a red herring, sure.
Yeah, that could be something they do as well. Okay, so onto our Magma Ragers tip. We've obviously talked a lot about the new expansion, so we're going to keep it a little bit shorter. But our tip for this week is going to be all about playing to your hand. So what does this mean? In any given, with any given deck, there's often multiple ways to win, multiple ways to kind of go about the strategy from the deck creation perspective, the cards that are in your deck. But what's most important a lot of the time is to realize what you actually have available to you. What are the cards in your hand, and what are they telling you about the way that you need to go about winning this game? So, it's about when you have the more aggressive cards, maybe you need to go with a more aggressive strategy and focus on killing your opponent as soon as possible if you can see that you're going to run out of resources. Or maybe you have some more value cards like Lich King, or, just cards that can generate you value over time, and you can more play towards that and kind of stretch out your resources a little bit more over time. This is, I think, something that is particularly common in mirrors as well. Where you kind of see this, because then the strategy is similar from both decks' perspective, and it can be one way to give yourself a good edge in mirrors. But there's a couple other decks that these kind of realizations are important for.
Yeah. So some of the decks, I mean, we're going to give some examples, some of the common decks. And so two decks that I think kind of similarly, it's Odd Rogue and Aggro or Aluneth, or also called Secret Mage. Basically currently utilizes cards like Mana Worm and Arcanologist.
Yeah.
And Odd Rogue is obviously, it's the main aggressive deck right now in the meta, I think.
Yeah.
And so the reason why we choose these examples. So with Odd Rogue, generally, you're quite an aggressive deck, but sometimes you might want to kind of almost slow down and focus more on stabilizing the board because, for example, the main card that comes to mind is Fungal Mancer.
Yeah.
Fungal Mancer is a card that obviously as a 5-mana 2/2 it's pretty weak, but obviously the reason why people are playing it is because of its battle cry, and as a result, you only you might want to try set up a board where you trade and clear the board so that you have 2 minions to fully get the benefit of Fungal Mancer.
Yeah, so when you have a card like Fungomancer, obviously you're going to play in a slightly more zoo-ish style. You're going to take your favorable trades and try and set up your board, obviously with your positioning as well, such that you can set up the kind of Fungomancer that you're looking for. And I mean, that's definitely an interesting way to play Odd Rogue. I think one of the other interesting cards in Odd Rogue is obviously Hench Clan Thug, something you kind of most of the time want to slam down on 3, but you also sometimes, want to play with your, how you use your dagger can depend on if you have a Hench Clan Thug. Especially if it's not just kind of a Hench Clan Thug on 3. If you have it a little bit later in the game, how you use your dagger is also very important in how you synergize with that Hench Clan Thug. You don't want to have to be playing that Hench Clan Thug on a turn when you have no charges on your dagger and no mana to dagger up.
Sure. And then Secret Mage, the other one is, so Secret Mage a lot of times is also known as a tempo deck. Sometimes called Tempo Mage. And a lot of the time usually I say very generally speaking, you land a Mana Worm and like some other minions, and then you keep the board clear by using your spells a lot of the time in order to push damage with your minions.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes, most notably, when you draw Aluneth, you then, a lot of times you can then potentially ignore the board because with Aluneth, you're going to draw a lot of your burn. So you can then just start literally throwing things to face. And you can almost go, okay, I don't care if I lose the board. I'm just going to attack and get as much damage as I can now. And even with cards like Mana Worm, you might just fireball face just to, get the 6 damage plus the additional 1 from a Mana Worm just to get that damage because Aluneth, you have Aluneth, and therefore you can commit to the plan of just burning him out.
Yeah, like as you say, if you have slightly more expensive burn, like Fireball, you might even use it on turn 5, knowing you're going to play Aluneth on turn 6, and then hopefully draw into more of your burn, because maybe after Aluneth, you're not going to have a chance to play that Fireball. Whereas on the other hand, with the Mage deck, if you have like a handful of minions and no Aluneth, you might kind of need to maybe trade more favorably on the board and try and get more damage persistent from your minions until you can reach your burn resources. And I mean, that's the big thing, right, with the deck. It's all about knowing how much damage do I have. You kind of have to play a little bit to your outs and to what you're going to draw, but also to what your hand is telling you. Is your hand telling you that you need to be aggressive with your minions here because you have this burn damage in hand? Or is it telling you that, like, look, you just have a bunch of minions in hand, you need to kind of trade and stay ahead on the board so that you can best utilize the minions in your hand?
Yeah, so that's kind of, I think, that's kind of the examples from that, knowing those sort of things. And then
there's a couple other decks that are good examples that aren't just as much of the kind of aggressive strategy examples, and that's decks like Miracle Rogue. So Miracle Rogue definitely has a lot of particular hands where you want to go with a very specific strategy. So obviously the big thing everyone knows about is creating a big Edwin Van Cleef. So, it's a case of, do you go all in with your preps and eviscerates maybe early on just to create a really big Edwin Van Cleef? Obviously, this depends on a couple things. It depends on the matchup, for one, and what answers they can have to it. But it also depends on kind of what your hand is telling you, If you have maybe, let's say it's like turn 4, turn 5, you have a bunch of cheap spells, a Gadgeteer and Auctioneer and like a Van Cleef, then if you go really all into the Van Cleef, you can get super punished by not having anything to play with your gadgets and auctioneer. So you kind of want to look at your hand and figure out how you're going to win the game based on that. Or do you have something like a Felderai Strider where you can instead play to space your resources out a little bit better to get the best value out of it. Let's say you have a hand that is like Gadgets and Auctioneer, you've played a Felderai Strider, and you have some cheap spells and a Van Cleef. I mean, that's a big turning point. Do you go all in on the Van Cleef, or do you play for the Gadgets and Auctioneer to save the cards with that and draw the spiders? So, I mean, those are the big kind of things in Miracle Rogue as to how you want to play to your hand. Obviously, we also have the kind of Dagger and Henge Clan Thug interactions that we spoke about with Odd Rogue as well.
Yeah,
and then,
I mean,
yeah?
Yep.
Another interesting deck to consider is also Even Warlock. In Even Warlock, you also want to consider how much you're hurting yourself, and if you can get yourself to like that Hooked Reaver stage. If you have like a Hooked Reaver and a Shroom Brewer in your hand, you might want to rather take a little bit more damage or play, not play your cards with Taunt out on the board immediately in order to take a little bit more damage. So you can play your Hooked Reaver first, and then you want to play your Shroom Brewer afterwards. It's all these kind of things, as well as kind of how fast do you need to play out all the demons in your hand. Sometimes you play out, let's say, a Hooked Reaver into like a Doomsayer. Even though it's going to die immediately. Let's say you have a Blood Reaver Gul'dan that you're going to play on 10, and you don't actually have any other opportunity to play that Hooked Reaver before then. So you just want to get it in your Blood Reaver Gul'dan pool so that you get as powerful a possible Blood Reaver Gul'dan on 10. So it's all these kind of things. Like I think Even Warlock is a very good example. There's obviously the super simple example of don't play your 2-drops when you have a Mountain Giant in hand, as it's going to prevent you from playing that out.
Okay, like
if you're on the coin.
Yeah, and also it depends if you depending what deck you're playing against. Because against aggro deck, you still. But against slow decks, it's usually then even if it's a play to beat or whatever, rather just hold it so you can play the giant earlier. And then you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's the super simple example. Obviously, there are other times as well that in like Mirrors is an exception with Doomsayer, but I think we spoke about that before as well. So, I mean, that's really our Magma Ragers tip. It's about knowing the strategy that your deck has. How is your deck meant to win in specific matchups? That's obviously something you need to know first up. And then you need to know what is the actual context of my hand and how does that alter my overall strategy? I mean, that's the kind of next step to take, to look at your hand and go, where does this lead me? What kind of path to victory can I plot using these cards in my hand and maybe one or two more that I'll draw?
What are the cards whispering to me?
Okay, and finally, of course, we have our little esports wrap up. We had HCT Oakland that happened over the last weekend. We had Taray walking away as the winner there. Most interestingly, having Quest Rogue in his lineup. He's been well known as like a very prominent and very big fan of the deck, alongside players, like Killing All Day and that. I think they practice together, or at least they discuss a lot. And he actually took Quest Rogue, which is something I wouldn't really recommend for ladder as much, but definitely in a tournament where you're expecting a more control meta, it did work out for him, and he managed to take home the victory there and secure himself a lot of ACT points as well as $5,000. The rest of the top 8 was largely American players. Not a lot of familiar names. There's a couple like Seo Hyun, Impact, Kuonet that we do kind of recognize, but a lot of the others are not names I recognize. So they actually could also be like Latin American players for all I know. Or actually, a lot of them could be from anywhere, but I'm guessing they're American players based on the fact that most of their names are in English at least. So yeah, I mean,
wow.
They're at least not like the notable European players that we know, right? So the safe guess is to guess that they're local. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That they're from the country that's hosting it. So yeah, and the other big thing to note, obviously not something that is particularly feels good, man, for us here in South Africa. But HGG has started. So, the Hearthstone global games that aren't as global as they would like to be because they include Africa are underway now with the first round of Swiss competition. The format has changed a lot from last year. It's a lot shorter from start to finish, less phases, and they don't have this kind of group stage system. Basically, they're running Swiss with the teams to determine the pairings as well. So that means we're going to get a lot of interesting matches, especially after the first couple rounds of Swiss, which will be the first couple play days. I mean, the first round, for example, they split over Tuesday and Wednesday, the 17th and 18th of July. So just keep an eye out on obviously the Play Hearthstone channel to see what's going on with the HGG. It's pretty interesting to see the team formats in particular and see how players play in different formats as well, because it's not just your standard last year standing or conquest that has its own structure as well to the games.
Sorry, just one more thing. Also, it's interesting to see like the dynamics of the teams and how they work together. Because sometimes the cast will discuss, but like sometimes in a team, they will each have like a role in terms of like one person will be specifically, focusing on someone's hand all the time. They will all basically have a focus or something.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think they actually, are they doing listen-ins for HGG? I don't believe they are, right?
I'm not sure.
Not like we've seen with like other team events, not non-Blizzard team events like Trinity Series or... was the Archon Team League before that. But anyway, it's still definitely interesting to watch. And, if you have another country that's maybe a second country to you, if you're South African, or if you're not from South Africa and your country is participating, then there's definitely a reason to support them there, get your patriotism on. But otherwise, that is all we have for today's episode. Thanks a lot for tuning in, everyone. Once again, we welcome any feedback. Maybe you thought differently about some of the cards. Maybe we missed some interesting synergies with them. Maybe you want to check out that table of elementals that you can get and find out if Pandemonia and I missed any, or if he put any incorrect ones in there. Hint, there is one that is incorrect, I believe, in there. But I'm not telling. I'll tell you afterwards. I'm not telling the people on stream. They can go out and look. And if they want to find that, or if they want to contact you, they can find you on Twitter at PandemoniaZA. For any of our audio-only listeners, ones that don't tend to watch, that is Pandemonia, but with the 3 for the first E and an O. A 0 for the O. So PandemoniaZA. And this is where you can find him on Twitter. And you can find me at dib_gaming on Twitter if you want to contact me, or if you want to give us any feedback. We really do welcome any feedback about the show at all. Anything is useful to know. So obviously also go ahead and like on YouTube. You can also drop us any comments there if you want, and we will respond there as well. You can also share the video as much as possible. That definitely helps us spread the word and kind of build to get more feedback and create a better show, which is really what we want to do. So thanks a lot, everyone, and thanks a lot, Pandemonia. Cheerio.
Cheerio.